Hey, what's up everyone? Welcome to another episode of CineMike. For this episode, I'm going to tackle a secret agent who was birthed in a series of books by an ex-naval intelligence officer named Ian Fleming. In 1962, he exploded onto the big screen with beautiful women, exotic locations, and larger-than-life villains with plots for world domination. He has survived 54 years cinematically, with 6 actors portraying him. He's so enduring that every one of his films confidently announces that he will return after the end credits. He's so cool that introducing his own name has gone down as one of the most iconic moments in cinema history. You know him as...
Bond. James Bond.
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 James Bond.
007 offers fantastical escapism. The viewer is transported into a world where they live vicariously through the suave spy with a license to kill. He has endless skills and gadgets at his disposal. He always gets the girl, and he always defeats the bad guy. It changes and evolves with the times, but it always stays true to its formula. Sometimes it does go a little out there, but it always comes back down to its roots. With 24 films to date, ranking this series from worst to best is no easy task. I'll get on with it. My top 10 favorite Bond films. Coming in the number 10 spot is Thunderball, the 4th Bond film and released in 1965. This was adapted from an Ian Fleming novel that was originally meant to be a feature screenplay. Fleming didn't properly credit a collaborator for the story, and this triggered a complicated lawsuit behind the scenes. And the end result was this movie stands out from the rest as being the only adventure to get a remake, with 1983's Never Say Never Again, which also starred Sean Connery. Back to 1965 though, after Goldfinger, the producers were on a high. Bond was kicking ass and they wanted to go even bigger. Thunderball was conceived to be cinematic, so it was an ideal choice. This time we've got Spectre threatening the world with stolen nukes. We've got Bond on a jetpack. We've got the beautiful location of the Bahamas. We've got a pool of sharks. And we've got lots of action. And some of it is very impressive, but most of it is underwater. If a lot of action underwater with muted sounds and slowed movements doesn't sound all that exciting to you, well then you're not alone. That part of the movie is a bit dated. Underwater photography was pretty innovative back in the day, and for its time it was impressive. Those sequences of armies clashing underwater with harpoon guns was a huge undertaking. So it's impressive, but also a bit tedious to watch at times. Aside from that though, I really enjoyed the scale and ambition behind this one. Now, the opposite goal drove the 9th film on my list, For Your Eyes Only, the 12th film and released in 1981. This time, the desire was to go smaller, with a story more in the spirit of the Bond from the books. After all, how can you go bigger than taking Bond into space like they did in the previous movie to this, Moonraker? The series often goes through a cycle of building itself bigger each time until it peaks, and it needs to reset by being a little bit more grounded. True, it's more Connery than Moore in its style, but that's what I like about it. I guess I'm just more of a Connery fan, but I personally prefer a Bond that feels a little closer to our world. And Moore was apparently uncomfortable at playing the grittier side of the character. One of the greatest moments for his Bond, in my mind, is apparently one of Moore's least favorites. Bond has a villain's vehicle dangling off a cliff's edge. The man is defenseless, but Bond shows no mercy. This is Bond at his best. He's not ruthless by nature, but he is when he needs to be. I think the gritty action is a breath of fresh air here. Rather than a finale set on a space station with laser guns, we instead have Bond ascending a dangerous cliff with no gadgets, just his skill and courage. There's also some other really cool action sequences in this, like with Bond and the female lead being dragged through coral reefs in shark-infested waters. The skiing stunt sequences were also really impressive. The only downside of the action is that the music in this is about as bad as it gets in this series. Music really can make or break a good action scene. The other misstep in this is bringing back Blofeld, Bond's greatest nemesis, to just dispatch him immediately in an incredibly anticlimactic comedic moment. Though I did like the callback to Bond's deceased wife in the events from On Her Majesty's Secret Service, I just felt that this wasn't a really good conclusion to that storyline. Up next, at number 8, you've got your grounded ones, and then you've got your over-the-top ones. I generally do prefer the grounded ones, but if you're going to go out there, then my number 8 is definitely one of the more fun choices. The Spy Who Loved Me. The 10th film in the series and released in 1977. This movie was much needed after the really disappointing previous film, The Man with the Golden Gun. The franchise's survival depended on reminding audiences why nobody does it better than Bond. With a goal for the movie to be the biggest Bond yet, they went for broke. From the pre-credit sequence where Bond skis off a cliff and opens his parachute with a British flag, you know what kind of movie you're in for. This one has all the campy tropes and cliches that would inspire parodies. You've got your larger-than-life villain with a plot for world domination in Stromberg, who's a wealthy megalomaniac with plans to nuke the surface of the planet to start a civilization at the bottom of the ocean? Even Dr. Evil would raise an eyebrow to how over-the-top that plan is.
Right.
This is also the first of 2 appearances for the appropriately named henchman Jaws, who has metal teeth that can bite through basically anything. He's one of the most iconic and recognized henchmen in the series, but in my opinion, he's also a little overrated. Then you have the Gadget Car, which is armed with, the usuals, missile launchers, machine guns, and, it transforms into a freaking submarine. Really over the top, but in the best of ways. The action set pieces are really huge in scale in this. The finale is fought between 2 armies inside a huge supertanker that swallows nuclear submarines. The incredibly massive set was designed by the brilliant Ken Adams, whose sets throughout the early films are legendary. The movie also doesn't disappoint with traveling to beautiful locations across the world, like the Austrian Alps and the Pyramids of Egypt. This also has one of the series' most iconic opening musical numbers in it. Nobody Does It Better, performed by Carly Simon. You also have the leading Bond girl, played by Barbara Bach, Triple X. Unfortunately, she's pretty wooden and dry in this, despite being given a pretty strong character to work with. Sure, the movie's a bit ridiculous, but it executes it all with great style and fun. It knows exactly what it is, and it delivers. My next choice may be a bit unconventional for a top 10 list of some Bond fans, but I think that it's underrated. It came at an uncertain transitional time when the franchise was trying to redefine itself. For my number 7 spot, I'm giving it to The Living Daylights, the series' 15th entry and released in 1987. For me, I rank it here for many reasons, but the 2 most important: it was possibly the first Bond movie that I ever saw as a kid, so I'm a bit biased in that sense, and more importantly, this is the movie that made Bond human again. It was a welcome change from the aging Roger Moore, who arguably overstayed his welcome. While Moore was fun, his campier take on the character was a bit of a departure from the literary Bond that started the franchise. When moving on to Timothy Dalton, they had one goal in mind: bring Bond back to the basics. Dalton was a Shakespearean-trained actor with a desire to play the character closer to the books. His take was to make 007 more conflicted and vulnerable, while still holding on to the classic charm and ruthlessness. I felt that he succeeded in that goal. I think you could even say that he and his films were ahead of their time, as Daniel Craig's films took a bit of a similar direction and tone later on. The story is admittedly a little convoluted, but I also appreciated that it was not so straightforward and had some mystery to it. It's also more in line with some of the espionage plots from the books. The villains are also not some of the more classic Bond villains. Sanchez in Dalton's second movie, License to Kill, is much more memorable, for example. Still, I think that the tone and style of this movie makes up for it. The movie sports some great action scenes. I enjoyed the opening sequence showing Bond in a training exercise that's gone wrong, and it has one of my favorite gadget car chase sequences. The assault on the Soviet air base in Afghanistan is an impressive battle scene, and it leads into this edge-of-your-seat fight between Bond and the henchman while hanging out the back of a plane high in the air. That is definitely one of my favorite stunts from the series. Coming in number 6 for me is the defining Bond film Goldfinger, the 3rd film and released in 1964. Where the first film, Dr. No, defined the character of Bond, this one helped define the world around him. The formula becomes solidified, and the standard is set for what all future installments would be measured against. The movie has some of the most iconic elements in the series' history. Everyone knows the image of the gold-painted Shirley Easton laying dead on the bed. Everyone knows the scene where Bond is being interrogated by Goldfinger with the laser moving up in between his legs. You've also got the first and most classic gadget car with the Aston Martin DB5. There is the memorable henchman Oddjob and his razor-edged bowler hat. Goldfinger himself is remembered as one of the most iconic villains in the series. He was played with a great balance of larger-than-life quality, but also with a calculating calmness. This movie also features the least subtly named Bond girl in the series, with Pussy Galore. It's amazing they got away with that back then. But despite her name objectifying her to an extreme, she does actually turn out to be one of the tougher Bond girls. Why don't I rank this movie higher on my list? It's often number one for a lot of fans. Well, there is one flaw that bothers me about it. Bond becomes too inactive during the last half of the movie, spending most of the time as Goldfinger's prisoner. Of course, he tries to escape, but pretty much everything he does is thwarted. The only influence he has in preventing Goldfinger's plan from succeeding is by convincing Pussy Galore to notify the authorities of the plot. And how does he convince her, do you ask? Oh, just by forcing himself on her and giving her the sex? No means no, Bond. That she could be manipulated to the good side just by a good lay, which was not even a consensual one. This kind of minimizes the strength that she had shown to this point in the story. True, Bond gets dispatched the bad guys in the end, but it's really Pussy who saves the day. Man, does that last sentence sound as weird as it was to say? But even though I rank this lower than most fans would, I still think the movie is an iconic classic, and it deserves tons of praise for the huge influence that it not only had on the Bond series, but in the genre in general. There was a 6-year-long delay in the Bond series from 1989 to 1995. With that and the end of the Cold War, many wondered if Bond would still be relevant. Thank the cinema gods that number 5 on my list proved the doubters wrong. In 1995, we got the 17th film in the series, Goldeneye, named after the Ian Fleming estate in Jamaica where he wrote the novels. They had a very difficult task. Resurrect Bond in the 1990s, and they needed the perfect actor to do it. They found him in Pierce Brosnan, who was actually cast in the role back during The Living Daylights, but obligations to the show Remington Steele got in the way. So he was delayed, and it was a long road for Brosnan to get back to 007, but he turned out to be a great choice in the end. He brought a combination of Sean Connery's ruthlessness, Roger Moore's sense of humor, Timothy Dalton's relatability, and he mixed it all together with his own charm. He took what we loved about the character and he updated it for a whole new generation. Changing M's gender to a woman and casting the great Judi Dench was an inspired choice to boss around Bond, who is a well-known womanizer. For the new Bond girl, they cast the stunning Isabella Scorupco, one of my favorites. She and Brosnan had great chemistry together. And Famke Janssen plays the memorable henchwoman Xena Onatopp, who loves to kill her targets by squeezing the life out of them with her thighs in a very sexual way. And it looked like she was having a blast in the role. And the mastermind villain of it all is Sean Bean as 006, a fellow MI6 agent and best friend of 007, who has come back from the grave. His betrayal to his country and to Bond makes the stakes much more personal this time. Bean does a great job of playing a dark reflection of Bond, and the battling of someone of equal skill certainly makes for more exciting action. The movie has an awesome pre-credit sequence where Bond bungee jumps off of a dam, then later motorcycling off the cliff's edge into a falling plane. Though the use of models was easy to spot, they are a very welcome old-school technique. I prefer them over CGI personally. There's a classic chase sequence where Bond pursues the bad guys through the streets of St. Petersburg by tank. Great stuff. Then the movie finishes off with a great cat and mouse fight between both 00s on top of a giant satellite dish in Cuba. One of my personal favorite fight scenes here for sure. They were just giving it their all in the choreography. The movie was led by director Martin Campbell, and he just knows how to put a lot of energy up on the screen. So aside from a few minor missteps, like some of the music I guess was a little lame, the movie proved that Bond was far from finished. It's just a shame that the rest of Brosnan's movies, they never served him as well as this one did. Over the years that Bond has been thrilling us, he's had a few close calls with death, both on screen and behind it. Very few film franchises make it long enough to celebrate 50 years, and so when Bond reached that impressive milestone, it made the film that celebrates it all the more important to get right. So coming in my number 4 spot is Skyfall, the 23rd Bond film that was released on the 50th anniversary of 2012. This movie appropriately explores Bond's mortality. Bond isn't a business of death, but it very rarely gets personal for him. This time, Bond comes face to face with death in the form of Javier Bardem as Silva, a flamboyant psychopath who wants to take revenge against Judi Dench's M for what he views as a past betrayal. M being in the crosshairs forces her and Bond to go on the run and into Bond's past. James Bond's past is an aspect of the character that has always been left very hidden and mysterious. We know his parents died in a climbing accident that left him orphaned, but not much else aside from that. My favorite aspect of this movie is how subtle and nuanced the themes of accepting loss and the inevitability of death is. That's much deeper than usual for a Bond film, and it's what elevates this film to being among the best. Sam Mendes is a really exciting choice to direct a Bond film. He has made a name for himself in doing character-driven dramas with beautiful visuals in films like American Beauty. He brings those same filmmaking sensibilities here. The cinematography in this is the best in the series. Such breathtaking use of colors and light. Javier Bardem's Silva, he just chews the scenery in the best of ways. He has all the gravitas of a classic Bond villain, but with an edgy menace that feels fresh. This is also the final performance of Judi Dench as M, and she definitely goes out on top. She just totally elevates every moment she's in. Honestly, she and Bardem easily deserved Oscar nominations for this. Then you have Daniel Craig returning as Bond in his best performance, I would say. This is a world-weary Bond who has been pushed to his limit. He has the difficult job of playing a man who deflects genuine emotion with cocky quips, and he keeps himself so guarded that he often appears cold, but you can see the fear and pain in his eyes. Another great thing for fans of the series is all the references and winks from previous films layered in this one. Some were subtle, and some were less subtle, like the return of the original Aston Martin DB5 from Goldfinger. You can really feel the love for the series here. Oh, and the opening song by Adele and the opening credits were both instant classics. Now, why wasn't this one ranked higher? Well, while Silva was a great character, his plan was way too convoluted. When you break it down, it's the simplest goal yet. No crazy coup or plans for world domination. All he really wants is just to kill M. Yet his plan to do it involves so many unnecessary steps and overly complicated plotting. The other issue here is that Bond, he essentially fails. Silva gets what he wants in the end. And he gets it because Bond's plan to protect M sucked. What in the hell made Bond think that it was a good idea to drive M in the middle of nowhere Scotland, with no backup and only a couple of rifles, and a really old groundskeeper to defend her? It's an incredibly emotional and touching moment, but it's tainted when you realize just how bad his defense plan was for her. And now, on to my top 3. After 20 movies that spanned over 40 years, Bond was starting to show his age. With movies like Batman Begins showing that starting fresh grants a lot of freedoms that the audience is hungry for, the Bond producers decided now was the perfect time to adapt Ian Fleming's first 007 adventure, with the 21st Bond film, Casino Royale, released in 2006. Unfortunately, the film rights to the novel were stuck in legal battles since the series started. Finally, it found its way home. Enter Daniel Craig. He was initially met with a lot of skepticism and judgment. Oh, he's too blonde, he's too short, and who cares? Once fans saw Craig's Bond, the doubters shut their mouths. As it turns out, he was arguably the best Bond since Sean Connery. He still had the charm, but the film toned down the campiness in favor of a more gritty version. This is a Bond that would rather use his skills and fists over gadgets, whose ego is just as useful to him as it is harmful. This is also one of the more conflicted Bonds, and his poker face, it's hiding more than just his cards. The story follows Bond as he tries to bankrupt a terrorist financier named Le Chiffre by beating him in a high-stakes poker game. These are much smaller stakes than what has become typical for a Bond film. It stays more true to the original story than one might expect. They even keep a torture sequence where Bond is repeatedly beaten in the balls by Le Chiffre. It takes risks, and they make the movie stand out from many of its predecessors. It has the scaled-back thriller elements of the books, but when it explodes with action, then it goes big. There's a really exciting chase sequence where Bond pursues a Bond maker who just so happens to be a parkour master. The stunts in that scene are just insane, and shows early on what a beast this Bond is in a fight. Teaming up with Daniel Craig is Eva Green as his love interest, Vesper. She challenges him by seeing right through his mask and armor. The trouble for Bond is that he doesn't see through her armor until it's too late. The villain Le Chiffre is played by the great Mads Mikkelsen. You have two types of Bond villains, those that go big and those that go quiet and unsettling. Mikkelsen aims for the latter, and he plays that very well. His dark eyes matched against Craig's bright blues makes for some intense poker playing. I only have one complaint in the first 3/4 of the movie. That terrible scene where Vesper is showering in her dress while Bond is sucking on her fingers. The level of shock and dismay that she's in, and you'd think she stepped right out of Schindler's List. And I'm sorry, that finger thing was way too strange to be sweet. I like how Vesper challenged Bond, but she was also annoying at times. Also, the last part of the movie just isn't Bond. The idea that after all this hard work to become a 00, that he just give it all up for a girl that he barely knows, it's just not very character for me. I mean, especially the cinematic version. The execution just felt very melodramatic and cheesy. If not for these issues, this could have been the best in the series. Coming into my number 2 spot is a true underdog. It was considered a disappointment to the franchise at the time of its release. Who would have guessed back then that years later, this film would go on to be regarded as one of the best Bond films? I'm talking about On Her Majesty's Secret Service, the 6th Bond film and released in 1969. This was perhaps the most uncertain time in the Bond franchise, as it was the first time that the series attempted to replace its star. Sean Connery had grown, I guess, resentful towards playing the character, and more importantly, towards the film's producers. So, how do you replace the man who made James Bond a household name? Rather than going with a star, the producers went with the Australian model George Lazenby, who had no acting experience other than commercials. It's a decision that they'd come to regret, as he was apparently a pain in the ass to work with. Many people criticize his acting in the movie, but I actually think that the criticisms are a bit too harsh. The worst thing about his appearance is the choice to dub over him for a huge chunk of the movie while he's in disguise. It was noticeable, the change in voice. That section of the movie drags in general, and it also confuses continuity since Bond and Blofeld appear to not recognize each other despite having just met in the previous film. But I digress. Despite brief moments where Lazenby's inexperience showed, he did for the most part meet the requirements for the role. He moved well, and was especially good with the action. He managed to show a little vulnerability in Bond's love story with Diana Rigg's character, and of course it could be argued that she was so good that she elevated his skills. Riggs stands out as being one of the only girls that Bond actually falls in love with. The film takes a huge risk by being faithful to the book and ending their brief marriage in tragedy. Ending a Bond film in such a dark note was shocking at the time, and being true to the source material was a big desire for director Peter Hunt, who was formerly an editor for the series. Hunt is truly the hero of this movie. His approach to shooting action was exciting and innovative. A lot of people credit cutting on action and handheld camera work to future films like Star Wars, but Hunt was doing it well before most of them. This movie has some of the best choreography, the most creative action, and the most breathtaking stunts in the series. From the jaw-dropping ski sequences, including an avalanche rolling down on our hero, to a car chase that moves into a derby race, and then to the assault on Blofeld's fortress in the Austrian Alps. The action in this totally holds up to today's standards, in my opinion. This Bond film is masterfully executed. I liked Lazenby, but if Connery in his prime had played Bond in this, well then this probably definitely would have been in my number one. And now, on to my number one pick for the best Bond of them all. For me, this movie had the perfect balance of the fantastical, but grounded in a gritty espionage thriller. I'm talking about From Russia with Love, the second Bond film and released in 1963. They hit the ground running here, coming off of Bond's introduction to the movies in Dr. No. You've got the same creative team returning this time, but perhaps the most important is the directing and acting team of Terrence Young and Sean Connery. It was, after all, the two of them that worked hard to create Bond's cinematic representation on the first film. While that offered a great foundation, I think that From Russia with Love features the best of the character, showcasing just how cool and suave he is, as played perfectly by Connery. He is the Bond that all others are measured against. He walks into a room and you feel that he's just as likely to romance a girl as he is to shoot someone. He's both a gentleman and a killer. Without him, I think it's doubtful this series would have succeeded. This time he meets his match with the equally skilled Spectre agent Red Grant, who's played as a cold and calculating psychopath by the great Robert Shaw. He's pulling the strings behind the scenes as Bond is manipulated by a beautiful Soviet embassy clerk into stealing an electro decoder from the Russians. All of this is a trap set by Bond's greatest enemy, Blofeld. Here, you only see him from the neck down petting a white cat, kind of an iconic image. Rosa Klebb is also an interesting and odd villain who has the really memorable hidden knife that pops out her shoe. Ali Karim Bey is also my personal favorite of Bond's allies from the series. He's just so likable and he steals all the scenes that he's in. So, sorry Felix Leiter, you're cool too, but the action in this movie may not have the scope and size of future films, but it makes up for it in suspense. Tension builds up on a train as Grant assumes the identity of an ally and plots with Bond to get across the border with the Lecter. You're just waiting for things to go down, and it doesn't disappoint. Bond and Grant engage in what I think is the most iconic fistfight in the series as they throw each other around the confined and claustrophobic train car. Now, even the best Bond has its faults. The lead Bond girl, Tatiana, came across a bit too clueless and helpless. Considering her position, you'd think that she'd be somewhat capable, but she's so easily manipulated. The romance between her and Bond felt a little too one-sided, and as what often happens, she falls too fast and too hard for him. Also, there's this idiotic moment. That doesn't do anything if the boat is in motion, dummy. This movie just has an irresistible style, and for me, it just feels the most classic. The series is usually at its best when it sticks closer to the Ian Fleming books, and I think that really comes across here. And there you have it. I love these movies. Bond was the foundation in which future action films and franchises built on top of. It has been incredibly influential. The fact that the series is still alive and well to this day after over 50 years proves how enduring it is. So I'm looking forward to the future of this series when Bond returns for his next adventure. Click like if you enjoyed this video, and please feel free to comment below. Tell me if you agree or disagree, and feel free to leave your own ranking. I'd love to see it. I also welcome you to subscribe to the channel. So until next time, this is Mike, signing off.